All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the final and closing session of Black Minds Matter. My name is Luke Wood, and I've been the faculty member for this course. I just want to thank everyone for being part of this learning experience. For those who are joining us in person, we have some guests as well here in class today, and for those who are joining us online. So what I wanted to do, Craig, can you go to the next slide or click on it? So what I wanted to do is just put up my contact information since this is our last session for those of you who would like to stay in touch with me who are visiting us publicly. There is my Twitter handle. You can reach me at Dr. Luke Wood, and my email is luke.wood@sdsu.edu. If you have any questions or comments or want to follow up, looking for ways that we might be able to partner, please let me know, reach out to me. I look forward to connecting with you. So hopefully you will do that. In addition, during every session, we thank our partners who have helped us in terms of supporting the delivery of this course, Black Minds Matter. Our partners include the Education Trust West and the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, who will have a guest with us today from the campaign. MOB, Moms of Black Boys United, and we'll have a guest with us today from MOB. San Diego State University Instructional Technology Services, who allow us to use their services in delivering this course and allow us to use this really cool board that we've been having this whole semester called the Light Glass or Light Board. Our Scholarship Matters, and the Center for Organizational Responsibility and Advancement. And then I also want to note that what we've done with this class is that we have recorded every session, and every session is on YouTube. So we received a lot of emails with people asking like, hey, I'd like to show this video in my class, is that okay? Absolutely, please do so. We did this publicly because we wanted this to be available to the public. So please use this as an opportunity to show the videos so we can expose more individuals to the kind of conversations that are taking place. The only caveat that I would have with that is when you do so, please acknowledge appropriately the work and individuals who are contributing to that. So whether that is myself or our guest speakers, I think it's important to give them proper attribution because they are presenting their work and their intellectual property, but please feel free to use those as learning resources. What we've also done as part of this is we put together just a very quick video of just some advice for students. We've been talking and asking most of our guest speakers about what advice do you have for parents because of our partnership with MOB. We've been asking individuals about advice for teachers and advice for faculty and advice for administrators, but we haven't really given a lot of advice to students. So we thought we would ask just some of our friends in the field to provide some advice to young Black males on how they can better engage their own success. So right now we'll go ahead and turn to that.
My advice to young Black male students is to live in your destiny and to learn the calling on your life.
Remember to see yourself as a scholar, see yourself as a student who has immense talents and genius and capabilities to be anything that you desire to be.
My advice to young Black male students is simply to question everything. We live in a world and a society where we are not taught a lot about ourselves, our history, and our heritage.
To understand that your life has immeasurable value, purpose, and promise.
And to be able to be in a mindset where you are continually learning, continue to be curious, and to continue to question things around you is part of what I believe helps push us to a more equitable and more just society.
You can be an innovator, you can be a creator, you can be a game changer. But above all, I would also encourage you to know your history, know from whence you come. And if you have the opportunity, if you encourage your parents to take you to Washington, D.C., to see the African American Museum, you will see all the great things that we have done as a people over time, over generations. And you will also see some of the things that will encourage you to be a champion for civil rights and social justice.
Because in this society currently, we're taught to devalue so much. We're taught to devalue ourselves. We're taught to devalue poor people. We're taught to devalue women. We're just taught to devalue so many things that make up the essence and the existence of a great society. And so being in a mindset where you're questioning things, where you're continuing to learn and grow, is essential to being able to push us further and further towards the world that we all want to see.
So just remember that you are great. You are standing on the shoulders of greatness, and continue to press on.
We have several guest speakers, four actually, this evening, who will be joining us via different mediums. The first will be Dr. Ivory Tolson, and then after that, we're going to go to Vanessa McCullers, and then Robert Simmons, and then we'll conclude with a recorded interview from Gerlando Jackson. So these are the individuals, you can see them on the right side of your screen, who are just donating really their time, their intellectual thought process, their commitment. So we want to thank them, as well as all of the other guest speakers who have done so as well. So I encourage you to reach out to them via social media and just send them a note saying thank you, because they didn't have to do this. They took their time to do this, and we truly appreciate that. So now what we're going to do is transition to Dr. Ivory Tolson. Dr. Ivory Tolson is the president and CEO of Quality Education for Minorities, which is QEM Network. Established in July of 1990 as a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C., QEM is dedicated to improving education for underrepresented students throughout the nation. Dr. Tolson is also a full professor at Howard University in the School of Education and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Negro Education. Previously, Dr. Tolson served during President Barack Obama's administration as the executive director for the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. He's also the senior research analyst for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and contributing education editor for The Root, where he debunks some of the most pervasive myths about African Americans in the Show Me the Numbers column. Dr. Tolson has more than 60 publications, including 4 books, 150 research presentations. I could go on and on about his intellectual contributions, but let's begin by just giving him a warm round of applause. Dr. Tolson, thank you for joining us. We truly appreciate you and for taking your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for those who may not be as familiar as myself with your work, can you talk just about the work that you do as it relates to Black males, and also kind of your journey to beginning and doing this work?
Okay, sure. First, thanks so much for having me on. And I actually like to do things live more than pre-record, so I think it worked out good. But I've been doing research on Black males ever since my dissertation, really. I did my dissertation on Black males in the criminal justice system. At that time, I was a pre-doctoral intern at the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta, and I did my dissertation on better ways to assess Black men who was in the criminal justice system, because a lot of the tools that we were using were actually based on a majority white sample. So my dissertation sought to determine whether or not the instruments we were using had the adequate level of reliability and validity to assess young Black males there. But the work that I've been most known for started with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation when I started doing research on academic success factors for Black males. I wrote a series of reports called Breaking Barriers, and Breaking Barriers looked at a variety of different data sets, and I wanted to get at the question of what separates the experiences of young Black males who do well in school versus those who don't do so well. So started out with a very simple premise, but it was actually at the time, and this was around 2007 when I began that research. What was very innovative about it is that most of the research at that time was doing comparative research. So they looked at where Black males were versus white males, and they look for that gap in between. And so this achievement gap research became very popular. But I understood that there was something very limiting about that style of research. For one, what it did was it placed white males in a position of almost aspiration for Black males in the research. So it almost implicitly stated that if Black males were to achieve the status of white males, then we would eliminate the achievement gap, and that's where we need to go. And that's a very flawed premise, because when you look at young Black males who are doing well in school, those who have to walk through certain neighborhoods, those that have to deal with certain limitations in their environment, like not having Wi-Fi at home or having a computer at home, having to deal with various aspects of their communities that someone else might not have to deal with. Comparing them to a different race is demeaning and insulting, because really they have to be much more attuned to their environment. They have to be much more sophisticated, and they have to have a certain set of gifts and intellect that a lot of other students don't have. So you know, I took the Ice Cube philosophy that who are they for us to be like? He said that in Truth to the Game. So I de-emphasize this laser focus on comparing Black males to white males, and compare within the community Black males who are high achieving to those middle achieving and low achieving. And so that was the premise behind Breaking Barriers. Also in Breaking Barriers, I used the voices of young Black males. I was judging a essay contest called Mile in My Shoes that focused on young Black males from 8th through 12th grade, just to talk about their experiences, what they need in order to be successful. And as I read these essays, a lot of the data that I was analyzing came to life, and a lot of things that I was finding in my research was being affirmed by these voices. So having that experience, all of the Breaking Barriers reports featured box quotes from young Black males. And I felt that including their voices in my research would make my research that more meaningful and relevant.
Absolutely. And so what are some of the things that you have found as part of doing this extensive research on Black males? Like, what are some insights that you feel have been particularly useful for the field?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my initial research was divided into 4 sections. The first section dealt with personal and emotional factors. So this was factors related to health habits like diet and sleeping. It dealt with peer influences, peer relationships. It also dealt with different things like whether or not they were early users of illicit substances, different things like that. The second section dealt with their relationship with their parents, so parenting practices, the composition of the household. The third section dealt with social and environmental factors. So it looked at the impact of community violence. It looked at their participation in extracurricular activities, church, different things like that. And the final section dealt with school-related factors. So it looked at school discipline. It also looked at the relationship they had with their teachers. It looked at how they felt about education. So all in all, it was probably about 24 factors that I was able to distill from the data that seemed to make a difference, that separated the lives and experiences of young Black males who were doing well versus those who weren't doing so well. And without going into every single finding, overall, I would say that a lot of the findings made good common sense. And, like with the personal and emotional factors, I used a data set called Health Behaviors in School-Age Children, where I looked at a lot of these things that we hear a lot about, like ADHD and depression and some of those things, anxiety disorders. But I found that the factors that had the most bearing on whether or not, or they had the most predictive power on whether or not they were doing well in school, were more simple things like what their diet consisted of, are things like, sorry about that, I have my my light is on a timer, so be energy efficient. But you know, different things like how much sleep they got at night, and so really there was a lot of conversations I was able to have with the data, and what I found was that a lot of people, because they were looking for something more nebulous, something more fancy, they were missing some very simple things. So they weren't, you know, they would see a child who would be restless in school, who didn't want to pay attention, who got bored very easily. And instead of asking the child, how much sleep are you getting at night? They were having the child evaluated for ADHD, putting them on psychotropic medication, when really the problem could have been that he's sharing the bed with 3 other people, or there's certain things that's bringing him anxiety at night and he can't sleep. So getting back to basics and just understanding that young Black males are humans just like everybody else, and most of the time we don't have to look for something that is, you know, ridiculously complex to understand why they're not doing in school and to help them to do well in school. We really have to get back to basics and make sure that they have the basic things that they need to survive in school. And really the most fundamental thing is their level of happiness. And I found that in the data. So when they come to school and they feel valued and validated, and they feel like people genuinely have their best interests in mind, that's one of the best ways to get them to perform in school.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think sometimes people hear that and they're like, okay, I get it. That's important. So now tell me, what are the strategies to do? And it's like, well, that's like a huge piece because it's not their common experience.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Now, in terms of the work that you've done with the Root, and I've also, you know, just seen your media posts in general, you've talked a lot about debunking just some of the like common myths and stereotypes that there are.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? One, how you got to doing that, like what brought that to your attention, and maybe like 1 or 2 of the things that you found to be as insights from that?
Yeah, well, I started debunking the myths because I felt like the myths was getting in the way of people believing my research. So, you know, like I said before, breaking barriers found some pretty fundamental things that was important for us to be doing that people just was not doing. And, you know, just like their use of security in school, you know, so I could tell people, you know, my research demonstrates that children who go through metal detectors, they don't feel as good about the environment that they're in, and they're more likely not to do well in school. But a lot of the excuses I was being given for continuing to use metal detectors was based on what I call BS. And by BS, I mean bad stats. And so I just heard excuse after excuse after excuse as to why they couldn't do certain things. You know, I would have principals saying, well, I can't have 4 units of math and science at this school because our children aren't reading on grade level. I would have administrators saying, we have these high suspension rates because most of the Black men are from single parent households. And by the way, there are more Black men in prison than in college. So I would just, you know, constantly hear these things. And when I would ask people, you know, what studies are you looking at? You know, what research are you citing to support these stats that you're throwing out? And it would always be this fuzzy kind of, you know, it was encoded in their common knowledge. So we had, you know, just straight up lies and misinformation that everyone was just holding on as gospel truth, and they were hanging on to these things. And so when I would tell them things like, you need a good breakfast program at your school, because my research is showing that children who eat nutritious meals do better in school, they would, say, well, this is the real reason why they're not doing well in school. It's not because we're not feeding them in the morning. It's because of this. And so that's when I started doing the myth busting work. That's when I started to, I just wanted to take these things I was hearing so often, and one, I wanted to check it out and see if it was true. What was the research that was demonstrating this, and two, if it wasn't true, I wanted to use it to disarm these people who was getting in the way of progress. And what I found was that most of the things that I was hearing, if not everything that I heard, was false. It was at least poorly context, but most of it was false.
So can you give us like one or two examples?
Well, more Black men in prison than college. That was the most straightforward debunking, and probably the one that got me the most attention. That actually got me, in direct conflict with the ones that originally authored the report, who conceded that today there are more Black men in college than prison, but their dispute with my research and the research of the one who I partnered with, Jenks Morton, our contention was that their original study was flawed, not just that things had changed. And you all can look at the article to see my argument with that, but it's clear that their original study was flawed.
So it is safe to say that there are not more Black men in prison than in college.
Yeah. Right now, everyone in the academic community who has analyzed this agrees, even the ones who authored the original report, agrees that there are roughly about 700,000 more Black men in college than prison.
There you go, myth busted.
So that was, an example of one that was real clear-cut debunking. Some of the things that were more nuanced was parents, and this is something that people hang on to a lot. Yes, more Black men are being raised in homes that don't have a mother and a father present than not. So that's not up for dispute. The dispute comes from what contribution that has to their inability to do well in school. And I've written a series of articles on this. I wrote a couple for The Root. I wrote another one for more scholarly, peer review publication. But the synopsis of my finding is it matters who the parent is, not who the parent is sleeping with. And so there are many things that a single parent can do that will nullify the disadvantages of being in a single parent household as it relates to how well their child is doing in school. Now, some of those other things like, the ability to handle finances and things like that, I didn't measure that. I only measured how well their child was doing in school. And something as simple as a parent, that single parent, having an associate's degree nullifies that parent is doing better, or that child is doing better in school than a two-parent household where just one of the parents dropped out of high school. So the short of it is we try to simplify these issues too much. We want to just break them into categories and say they're in single-parent households, they're in two-parent households, these two-parent households will do better, but it means so much more than that. Co-parenting is also very important. Every single parent looks different. And there's a lot of single-parent households that have very good co-parents, our extended family, and that nullifies these things. So, essentially, there's a lot of excuses that people use for why Black males can achieve, and all of that can be disputed and debunked in the research.
That's powerful. So let's move on to talking about some recommendations. So we have two different communities here, who are participating. We have, with our partnership with MOB, a lot of parents who are participating, and then also those who are educators. So maybe we can start with parents, since that we're making that transition. Can you talk a little bit about what do you see as things that parents can do to better be advocates for their Black boys and men? Any recommendations that you have gleaned from the research that you've done?
Yeah. Well, in the section that I did, let me turn the lights back on. Keep everybody awake anyway. So the section in Breaking Barriers that looked at parent factors, one of the things that I found very interesting is that young Black males who had positive parents, who used more positive practices to help to stimulate their child to do well versus punitive practices to get their child to not do something bad. The ones that were engaged in these positive parenting practices, they had Black males who reported higher levels of academic success. So young Black males who heard their parents say things like, "I'm proud of you." Young Black males whose parents told them, I love you more. They reported higher levels of academic success in schools, and so did their schools. Another thing that's important to understand is that young Black males whose parents stressed college were doing far better in school than those who didn't have parents that emphasized college. College promotion, taking them on college tours, all those types of things is very, very powerful. Another thing that's very important, and there was other research that was done that looked at 3 levels of parent participation in school. One was academic socialization. So these were parents that socialized their child to the academic community or to school, helped them to understand the value of school, helped them to understand proper school etiquette, things like that. Then there was school-based participation. These are parents that volunteered at the school, those who were present at the school for different activities. And the last was help with homework. Parents who gave this home-based help with their child's schoolwork at home. Those were the 3 things that was most important. But of those 3, the one that had the highest correlation with academic success was academic socialization. And the one that had the least was home-based help with homework. And a lot of times schools emphasize the reverse of that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times schools want parents to focus on homework because that's what helps them out more. But what helps the child out more is if the school is the one that's teaching the child and the parent is the one socializing the child. And when you have that kind of partnership, then you have a much better working relationship between parents and the school.
That's powerful. So, and it seems like some of those things can also translate then for example, to teachers in terms of, you used to talk about the importance of essentially positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
What recommendations would you have for those who are engaging either in an instructional function, a counseling function, or any other function with our Black boys and men? What recommendations would you have for them?
Talk to the children often and listen to the children more. So, one of the problems with the education system as we have it constructed is that we probably do this with young Black males or Black students more than anybody else, is we associate doing good in school with being quiet. And my son is only 4 years old. He had a bad day at school, so I had to talk to him about it, get him back on track, tell him the things that he did wrong. And, he's only 4, so he's breaking things down in the very simple terms. But I asked him, I said, what are you going to do tomorrow to do better in school? And he said, be quiet. So I had to have this high level conversation with this 4-year-old about why being quiet doesn't mean doing well, that you have to know the right times to talk. But we socialize young Black males and young Black women to this mindset very early on. And so by the time they get to high school, surviving in school is shutting up and being quiet. And while they're not speaking, there's a whole lot of thoughts running through their mind. There's a whole lot of anxieties. And if they haven't been able to adequately express these thoughts and anxieties, it can come out in problematic behaviors that you don't understand. And if you don't try to understand it by engaging in these conversations with them, then all you're going to do is suspend them. And you're never going to address the real problem. So I would say number one is talk and listen. Help them feel understood. Help them feel like they matter. School should not be the place where you simply learn what you don't do well. There are too many people who come away from school learning that they're not a math person, or learning that they don't read as fast as other people. They learn all these things that they can't do. School should be a place where you discover your talents, where you learn what you do well. And so I would want every educator to have that mindset that they're going to go into the school to help students to discover their talents, not to help students to expose their weaknesses. And the final thing I would say is that you have to leave the biases out of it. And most people don't believe they have biases. But I remember asking a group of teachers, how many of you all have a sense on the first day who's going to do well in your class? Just about all of them raised their hand. And so I asked them, I said, how many of you all have a sense on the first day who's going to give you problems? Just about all of them raised their hand. And then when I asked them, well, what do you discover on the first day that leads you to think this way? I heard everything from who their parents were to how they presented themselves, whether or not they were talkative or whether or not they were quiet, all these types of things. Understand that all of those things are biases. And if you are judging students and evaluating them on whether or not they're going to do well in school on the first day and using information that is really superficial in nature, then you're going to create self-fulfilling prophecies rather than bringing out the best and the brightest in all of your students. So first day, think about every student having an equal shot at success, and learn about those students, learn about what helps them to tick, learn about what motivates them, and reveal those talents like we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. So if you want to ask a question to Dr. Tolson, please use the hashtag Black Minds Matter, hashtag Black Minds Matter, and we'll do time today. We're only going to be able to take 2 questions from him. I'm going to ask him one more question, and then we'll turn to any questions that are posed publicly. So again, that's using the hashtag Black Minds Matter. So I wanted to just ask one other question to you before we turn to the public questions. And that really deals with your work in policy, because you're a unique individual and scholar in that you straddle both worlds.
Yeah.
So, and you've done that in terms of your work with the Congressional Black Caucus and with the Obama administration. So can you talk a little bit about what you've done and where do we need to go from that perspective to advance? I mean, because that's what our conversation really wants to be about today, is where do we go from here to help move forward this agenda for Black males? So any thoughts and insights you have on that would be really appreciated.
Yeah, well, I started working with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation purely through happenstance. I was trying to find a extra, side job because, we don't get paid that much in academia. And I found this 6-week research position with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. It was supposed to be just for a summer. I was just trying to get some summer salary. But it ended up being a 6-year experience that ultimately led to my appointment with the Obama administration. But when I came to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, I was just like any other scholar. I had talked to other scholars so much that I forgot how to talk to normal people about normal issues. So I thought that, latent growth curves were, all the rage. And, I was, on Amos, and I had these fancy charts, and I was focusing more on the methods than the findings. So if I had a very sophisticated methodology, I thought I had a good study, even if the findings weren't that compelling. So I wasn't much different than most people in the academy, and working with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation helped me to realize that most of the way that I was operating was not a way that normal people would really understand it. And so when I wrote Breaking Barriers for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, there was a constant pushing me from the people who I was working with to make things understandable. And the more I tried to explain things in terms that normal people would understand, the more I realized I did not know as much as I thought I knew. Because if you can write about p-values, but you can't explain p-values to somebody who's outside of academia, then you don't know p-values as well as you think you know them. So what I would say, if you want to work with the community, if you want to work with policymakers, if you want to work with people outside of academia, then you're going to have to be able to translate the jargon into terms that people understand. And you're going to have to be in tune with what they need and appreciate what they need and understand that they need good findings and good recommendations more than they need a good methodology. And so it's important to hold on to the academic integrity, but you also have to be able to be in touch with the people whose lives you want to change.
Absolutely, that's really good insights. So our first question comes from Mike DeLay, who's a student in the public course. And he says, he would like for you to elaborate on what you mean by academic socialization for parents to their children. He says, can you provide some concrete guidance on what that means?
So academic socialization is helping them to understand why education is important, helping them to understand how to deal with basic problems in the school. So problems like, if your teacher gives you a grade that you don't like, what are the ways in which you deal with that? If you get suspended or get written up for something and you disagree with that, what are some of the things that you can do in order to rectify that? So those are some of the more, the key components to academic socialization. It's really just helping the child to get acclimated to the school environment, helping them to build confidence in school, helping them to build a presence, helping them to understand the connection between extracurricular activities and their academics, helping them to understand why certain things they learn would lead towards positive outcomes. So basically, that's what that is.
Okay. The next question comes from Fabiola Torres, and she says, how does one avoid the argument that being too positive is being condescending to students? That is something that we do hear a lot.
Mm-hmm. So you have to be genuine. So if it's not in your nature to be positive, or if you don't genuinely feel that positive way, then try to evaluate that about yourself before you just go in trying to be positive. I think students know how to sniff out bull, especially our kids, because a lot of times the way that they've had to survive is to be able to distinguish between people who may have their best interests in mind and people who don't. And a lot of times they may be suspicious of certain motives. And I think, this is true of a lot of Black men. How many Black men out there have been alone with a white woman on the elevator, and that white woman gives you this smile, and you understand what that smile is about. That smile is about, you know, I'm feeling a little uneasy. You know, I'm smiling at you. I want you to smile back and, you know, kind of give me that nod that I'm not going to be attacked by you. You know, at least that's how it's perceived to a lot of us. So these are young kids, and they're used to these smiles and this appeasement and things like that. You actually have certain teachers who never really seem that positive, but students love them the most. You have some teachers that's like, you know, boy, you better get your butt up in here. You know, I mean, they're saying things like that, and you know, they're saying, you know, they're saying, you know, they're saying things in very harsh and crass ways, but the implicit message in what they're saying is, I care about you. I don't want you to get in trouble. I believe in you. I think you're better than what I'm seeing right now. But they're not saying it in this way that's making the student believe that they're only saying it because they're uncomfortable, or they're only saying it because they think it's the right thing to say. So I think that's how you have to, I think the change really begins with you and you evaluating whether or not you are expressing yourself in a way that's natural to you, your motives for saying these nice things, whether or not you actually mean these nice things, and really try to develop the type of relationship with the students where you understand them very well, they understand you, and so you're being authentically nice, not nice as a strategy.
And there's a difference.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Tolson, we truly appreciate your time, and thank you so much for joining us. There's a lot of questions that we couldn't get to where people tagged you on Twitter. So if you have a few moments to look at a few of those, that'd be great. But again, thank you for all the work that you're doing and being a leader in our field. Let's give a round of applause.
Yeah, I thank you for your leadership too. This is very innovative and dynamic. I'm glad you're doing it.
Well, truly appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
All right. So at this point, we're going to transition to our next speaker, who is Vanessa McCullers. Vanessa McCullers has spent almost 2 decades working at some of the biggest companies in entertainment, including MTV, OWN, TMZ, and NBC. After years of putting the spotlight on advertisers through element of talent and production of award-winning talent, Vanessa began to look at telling the brand story through the lens of personal experiences. Her goal has been to tell personal stories that inform and can help change the lives of others positively. However, none of her training and skills prepared her for her own experience, watching her son deal with the after effects of watching the violent killings of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile in the summer of '16. It was at this time she discovered a group of moms on Facebook facing similar concerns who banded together to make change. Vanessa poured her skills and energy into Moms of Black Boys United, helping it develop into 2 separate nonprofit organizations and grow a community of over 200,000 moms across the country and beyond. Having worked in every media platform imaginable and having no other creative outlet, Vanessa decided to use her skills and true passions to develop the branding and communications of Mob and Mob United for social change. As the chair of communications, she is responsible for all internal and external content created and developed for Mob, and we'll talk more about her work with the organization. So please join me in giving a warm round of applause and welcome to Vanessa McCullers. All right, so thank you so much for joining us. We truly appreciate having you here. It's really just an honor. There's so much I want to cover. And again, so I know there's going to be people who are going to have questions. So feel free to start posting those using the hashtag Black Minds Matter, and we'll get to those. But first, if you could just start by talking a little bit about how you came to this work. I mean, I know some of it's in here, but maybe a little bit more personally, like, you know, your journey towards being an advocate for Black boys as a mother and as a intellectual thought leader, and just talk about that a little bit for us.
Sure. was not something I planned. Let's start there.
Okay.
I don't think any of it from the way that the Facebook group was started was something that we really planned. For me, it came from a very personal space of, as I mentioned, watching my son go through this. I have a 20-year-old son, and he is obviously the light of my life, along with my daughter. And I've always seen a very jovial young man in our household. And the morning after Alton Sterling was killed, that tone completely changed. And it was almost like a little bit of the light went out of his eyes. And he asked me a question that I really couldn't answer. And it was, how and why did this happen? How could they just kill a man like that? And so he automatically saw it for what it was, that Alton Sterling was murdered. And he could not understand how those who were put in place to protect us and to serve could have done something like this. And it truly bothered him, and it bothered me, because as a parent, I could not only not answer his question, but I couldn't guarantee that the same thing wouldn't happen to him.
Yeah, and that's a concern that all of us, parents of Black children, have, unfortunately. So you took this concern and then used your creative talents to help Mob. Can you talk a little bit about the organization, what it does, and your role in it?
Sure. So the organization did start out as a Facebook group. The morning that I was introduced, I think at that time, maybe about 15,000 moms had already requested to be a part of the group, and it had only started a few hours previously. Wow. Started by Depelsha Magruder, who was an entertainment executive as well. And she started it from the simple place of having two sons herself and having these fears and concerns that she wanted to share. And she sent an invitation out to about 30 moms, and 30 turned into a couple of thousand in about an hour, and then to a few, and then to, by the time I joined, 15,000. And 24 hours had not even passed at that time. And when I jumped in there, it was just a lot of moms saying, what do we do? And I'm so scared, and I'm so concerned. And my son is only 1, but I fear for his future. Or my son is 21 and I don't want him to leave my house, or, all of the things that vary in between. And we realized very quickly that we had to do more than just sit here and share these experiences and complain. We had to actually try and make some sort of a change. And the question then became, well, how do we make this change? Where can we really provide the best impact? And we realized a couple of things quickly. One was that a lot of our moms, really all moms, see their children through very proud eyes, and we just want the rest of the world to see our kids the same way. Yeah. So we want to try and change the narrative that has unfortunately kind of bogged, our sons down from being immediately pegged as troublemakers to seeing them as the future bankers, the future lawyers, the future educators that they have the potential to be. So we knew that we needed to really share that with everyone. We created a campaign, an image campaign called Protect Them, where we shared those images of us and our sons together in a way that felt very loving and endearing, in hopes that other people could see them in a similar way.
So essentially humanizing.
Absolutely, because we realized that, part of the big problem is that our sons are dehumanized from the time that they're small until they're grown men. They're just not treated with the same level of respect that others are.
Yeah. So now, Mob also does a lot of advocacy. So you have the national calls that you do, the pink parties. And can you talk about some of those other elements of the organization?
So the organization is broken into 2 nonprofits. The first side, of which I've shared, is our 501c3. It's Moms of Black Boys United for Social Change, very focused on changing the narrative and the perception. Also being a resource to moms across the nation. Providing information that will help them navigate the education and the judicial systems, and sometimes even the medical systems, which can play into why our sons are going through what they're going through. And then in addition to that, we realized, obviously, well, that helps to hopefully change what will happen in the future. But what about right now? What are we doing right now to affect change for the boys that are already in the system or potentially maybe in the system in the future? And from that, we have, Mob United for Social Change, which really focuses on changing policy that can affect the way that our sons are treated by those in authority. So that is everything from, we were a big part of the Raise the Age campaign in New York. We have, locked arms with moms who have been put in a situation where their sons have been brutalized or victimized. We worked very closely with the moms for the Michigan flood. I don't know if you remember, there's a situation where we had 5 young boys that were under the age of 14 that were held at gunpoint by police officers as they were walking home from basketball. So we worked with them, got them prepared to talk to the media, and in other cases where we have had to stand up for the rights of, let's say, Alton Sterling's and his family, and pushing for the dismissal of Betty Shelby. We've led the way in a lot of those demands. And so one of the things that we're hoping is that, by our work and advocacy, maybe we can put some positive pressure behind those who are like-minded, in the sense that they see where they can make changes that will help our sons.
Absolutely. So now I'm sure there's a lot of people who are hearing this and like, wow, I really want to become involved.
Yeah.
How does someone go about doing that?
Well, the advocacy side of our organization is member-based, and that is where people can become a member. There are various ways to become a member. On our website, mobunited.org is where they would go. As a member, you get a chance to connect with other people that are within your area. And we try to regionalize our approach to policy change. And that's where it comes from our regional groups. We have them all over the country, really. New York, Atlanta, Tennessee, Texas, California has a really sizable constituency here. And we are all working locally with our local representatives to try and fight for those changes. And so that's, people would go there. The other thing that is really helpful is that we really lean in on our members to volunteer for the organization. As I mentioned before, we provide resources to moms everywhere. A lot of the volunteer work really focuses on being able to help other moms navigate the system. It's so funny, some people don't even realize how intimidating the educational system can be for a mom. I heard, our last speaker was talking about, it's the quality of the parent, not the fact that they're a single parent. And he makes a really good point. I mean, I think that a lot of moms, seeing the road ahead of them, knowing that they have to go through all that red tape can sometimes be daunting. And sometimes they need a hand in trying to figure out how to navigate that system, because there are a lot of questions that can be answered. There's a thought that, the system is against you. It's not necessarily against you. You just need to know how to utilize the system to the best of your advantage.
That's powerful. So I'm sure from all of this work, you've learned a lot about what parents can do, like some real strategies and practices, whether it's what they can do directly with their sons or what they can do in terms of the policy realm, in terms of being advocates. So what words of wisdom and advice would you have for those who are engaged in similar work?
Oh, wow. Well, I think that, the more that we can tell our story, I'm hoping that the more that it will just continue to shine a light on the pressures that we're going through. It's interesting because right now we're seeing a lot of stories being told about women that have faced, harassment throughout their lives. And notice that the more stories you hear, the more attention that people are paying, the more changes that people are trying to make to this. Well, we want to have the same approach. We've actually been telling our stories a lot, and it seems like it's falling on deaf ears. We cannot stop. We must be ever present in that struggle and continue to tell our story every way that we can, and from various sectors, from the educational system, from the judicial system as well. I also think that, as far as we have to share information. I think that is so key. A lot of organizations I see, they kind of want to be in silos and they're not sharing their resources which is why we're so grateful to have the opportunity to work with you on this. I think the more that we're sharing information with different organizations, the more that we can really make an impact, because we're all fighting for the same goal here.
Mm-hmm.
Make no mistake, we all want to see equality, and we all want to see our sons being treated in the same light. So the only way we're going to get there is to work together.
Absolutely. We want to see them live, and we want to see them thrive.
Absolutely.
So I have one other question for you, but there was a question that came here that says, what would you say is the biggest obstacle, and this is from Justin, that Mob United has faced in this work? I'm sure there's many. So.
Yeah, there is. I think the biggest one for us is that I think that the use of social media. So we were born of a social media group. The challenge is that sometimes, because we grew so big, so fast, our voice gets nullified by all the wonderful pictures that people are sending in of their sons and the stories that they're sharing. A lot of times they're not getting the information that we're trying to share with them, trying to penetrate the system. So that for us has been the biggest challenge, getting the word out there, letting moms know that we can be a resource to them.
Okay. Now, and this isn't a question that was posed, and if you don't want to answer this one, you want to think about it for a second, feel free. But just as a researcher, sometimes, you know, we want our work to be effective, to be useful. Is there things that you think that those who are in my community can be doing that would be helpful to your organization or to parents in general? Like, what are some things that you want to know? And that may help those who are in this room and inform the kind of lines of research that we would like to do.
Right. I think that sometimes it's less about the research that's not being done, and it's more about the access to the research. I think that there are a lot of parents out there that just don't have the wherewithal to figure out those resources. As researchers, I think what would be helpful is to find the best ways to make your the research and the information that you founded available to the masses. So one of the things that we have found that was very important for Mob United is for us to partner with researchers like yourself to gather information and data around, you know, how our sons are performing and what obstacles they face, and then try and provide that to the public in a very palatable way. And that one of the projects that we're working on actually with a researcher in Denver, Colorado, has us taking data around preschool suspension and how it affects our young Black boys. And we're going to take that data and turn it into some meaningful stories that we can share with others. Because again, we think that the art of storytelling is a really great way to penetrate.
You know, it's my personal opinion that those two words, preschool and suspension, should not ever be put together.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so this question comes from Kadar. It says, can you share a success story that Mob United has achieved? I think it's important to share the good when discussing the bad that's being done to Black boys.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually a great success story with an unfortunate twist. Just recently, or actually last year, we had a mom who shared with us that her son was in juvie. He had some issues in school. He was in juvie and was unfortunately not faring very well. The stressors of being in that situation were making him act out more than anything else. And so she asked us if we could write him. And so our moms started writing. No one said you have to write anything specific, but they all just started writing different letters to him. And
what kind of letters? Like letters of
encouraging letters, like, you know, we're all here praying for you. Your mom talks so much about you. We hope that you can really, you know, keep your head straight and hurry up and do what you've got to do to get out of there. Well, about, I want to say maybe 3 months later, the mom had written us and said, you're not going to believe this, but he's been performing so well, they've allowed him to come home for the weekend. And the next thing was they've allowed him to come home permanently. And then he actually sent all the moms a message thanking us for continuing to encourage him while he was in that situation, because it was, our encouragement that kind of kept him strong while he was in there. And it just made us all so proud.
What a beautiful way of communicating love.
Yeah, through words. For a young man who's, I think he was 14, 15, to be in juvenile detention and to have hundreds of letters pour in for you from moms from around the country who don't know you, but know that they have a connection because they too have a Black son, I think is what really, really made a difference there. The unfortunate part of that story is that just this weekend, he lost his younger brother who was killed by the shootout, 13 years old. So imagine for him to have gone through all that positivity, to come back home and then, months later have to face something like this. I just continue to pray that we all pray that he continues to stay strong.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
But it just shows the importance and meaningfulness of doing this work.
Yeah.
So this question comes from Fabiola Torres. It says, has Mob United worked with Black police officers that are also mothers?
Yes.
That's a good question.
Yes, actually we have. So you mentioned earlier that we have these meetings on the weekend. So we have a national call bi-weekly, and we reach out to different guests that can provide information to our moms. Again, we want to, share our ability to be a resource. And so we've had all different kinds of topics that we've covered. Know your rights, obviously, is one of them. We've had police officers come in and talk about, how to react in a police encounter. And one of the speakers that we had that focused on that was former Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, retired Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, who, from the Los Angeles Police Department, has 4 sons, grown sons, has been through what we're being, and still continues to go through it as a mom. That never goes away. And she had some really key words of wisdom that she shared with us, again, about navigating the system. I can't stress enough how much consistency and persistence is very important as a parent, particularly as a mom of a Black boy, because if you're not persistent with the system, you can get sucked into it from a negative perspective.
Yeah. This next question comes from Justin. It says, what would you say is the biggest obstacle facing Black boys?
The biggest obstacle is perception. There's no doubt about it. We have to keep in mind the fact that the biases that are in place have been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years. So to be able to peel those layers back is going to be challenging. And I think that is what will eventually be, one of the biggest obstacles.
Absolutely. Next, so many questions coming in for you. Just how about this? I'd share this with you before I go to the next question. This is from DeMarcus Merritt. He just says, keep up the dope evolution improving work. We appreciate our mob. So here's the next question. It says, can you talk about how mob might work closely with attorneys or how they might use mob as a resource in doing that?
Yep. So, as I mentioned before, navigating the system is very challenging for moms, whether it's educational, judicial, or medical. I think one of the things that would be very helpful, and I know a lot of, there are organizations that have things like this in place, but in many cases, moms don't know where to go to get legal help. We want to be able to be a one-stop, if you will, for moms to know, who to talk to. And what questions to ask. So one of the ways that we could work with attorneys is by just having them. We often get moms who are looking for attorneys to help them with situations for their son. So volunteering your time, volunteering your services for moms that are going through, any kind of crazy situation right now is the best way that we can work with attorneys.
Okay.
Pro bono. Give us some pro bono time here.
Yes,
All right,
absolutely.
sure.
And some have,
Yeah.
right? I mean, because I know you work with different attorneys before as part of your work.
Yes, yes, we do. We have a couple of attorneys that we work with. I think Lee Merritt, we just did a
who was a guest on this?
Yes,
this
early
class?
on. We met Lee Merritt when the Jordan Edwards case came around in Texas, and we found out about it pretty early in the day. One of the things that's interesting is because we are a social media group, the minute something happens, like our Facebook group gets flooded with like, this just happened, what's mom gonna do? Can someone reach out to the family? Because it does go hand in hand, the support and the resource. A lot of moms just need someone to talk to when they've gone through a situation like this. And we provide that help in, actually, it's one of the biggest factors of the organization, providing that support.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So here's a question, and this one question is, what role do Black fathers play in Mob United?
Mm-hmm. Well,
or we could also rephrase that to, what role should Black fathers be playing? Any recommendations you might have for them?
I have one.
Yes.
Absolutely, being supportive of their mom. I'm, really blessed. My husband and I have been together for 24 years now, and he's in the room.
And he's here joining us. Thank you for doing so.
And he's really supportive. This is not easy work. There are late nights. There are early mornings. There are, my phone is buzzing because I have moms that have been through a situation and they can't sleep. Or I have a mom who is here in Pasadena who visits her son's grave every week and has done so since he died in June. And just to be that sounding board for her when she needs someone to talk to give her an outlet so that she can try and help other moms who are either in the situation or who don't want to be in the situation. That is the biggest support that fathers can give, is to be, a support system for their wives that are moms.
Okay. Any closing thoughts that you would like to leave the students who are here physically and those who are joining us online?
Yes. Volunteer your time. I never realized, I've always done a little bit of charity work here and there. Nothing has ever taken over my life the way how Mob has. So I need more volunteers. We need more volunteers. Volunteer your time. You're volunteering your time doesn't only have to be at a soup kitchen or at a homeless shelter or with elderly people. It can be with organizations like Mob United.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
We truly appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
And for the partnership in helping us to put on Black Minds Matter. So
thank you so much.
Let's give her a round of applause. We are going to transition to an interview with Robert Simmons. I'm going to pull up his bio here so I can read that to you. Okay, here we go. So Robert Simmons currently is serving as the Vice President of Innovation and Strategy for the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, who is also a partner in this course. Robert is a nationally recognized scholar and expert on issues of diversity and equity in higher education and K-12. Dr. Robert W. Simmons III has shared his expertise throughout the United States. As a member of the Diversity and Equity Collaborative EdChange, Robert has been asked to comment on issues of race and equity on numerous media outlets, including CNN. Under his leadership in the DC Public Schools as the first Chief of Innovation and Research, Robert was the Chief Architect of the nationally recognized initiative Empowering Males of Color. Under the framework established by the White House's My Brother's Keeper initiative, the work associated with empowering males of color in DCPS developed a pre-K through 12 approach to supporting African American and Latino boys in Washington, D.C. As a result of this work, Washington, D.C. was recognized along with Detroit and Oakland as one of the leading cities working to improve the lives of males of color. Prior to joining the D.C. Public Schools, Robert was the founding director of the Center for Innovation in Urban Education, a tenured professor of urban education and science education, and associate faculty member in African American Studies at Loyola University in Maryland. There's much more that I could read to you, but I think we should go straight to this interview so we can have an opportunity to hear his words of wisdom. So Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be here. How's everybody?
They're good, and they're excited to hear from you. And we just want to begin first by just thanking you for all the great work that you're doing and for being out there in front as again, a kind of a person who's straddling two different worlds and has been able to do so successfully in advocating for Black boys and men. So for those who may not be as familiar with your work, can you give a little introduction to yourself, how you came into this work, and kind of your role with the campaign?
Yeah, I came into this work growing up in Detroit. Always tell folks that it's in my DNA because of my mother and my father going to Morehouse and Spelman, but my father was incarcerated all of my life, and that had a significant impact on my development in childhood, but it also inspired me to become a teacher. So while I've spent a significant amount of time in academia, I also consider myself at my core to be a teacher and a community organizer. And so that over the course of time led me to the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. The Campaign for Black Male Achievement was started 10 years ago as a program led by Sean Dove and Rashid Shabazz in the Open Society Foundation. Over the course of those 10 years, as a philanthropic entity and as a part of the Open Society Foundation, the campaign has invested over $200 million in communities and organizations working on behalf of Black men and boys. 3 years ago, CBMA spun off to its own independent entity from the Open Society Foundation and has continued to do grant making, but has largely built the work around field building and movement building. The current CEO is Sean Dove, and Sean Dove started with the campaign when it was in the Open Society Foundation. In my particular role, I lead all of the work. Our national programming efforts are housed in our strategy and innovation team, things such as Rumble Young Man Rumble, things like our health and healing strategies, where we spend a lot of time working with schools and community on health and healing in the context of Black men and boys. We also spend a good portion of our time in our 5 core cities, Baltimore, Oakland, Milwaukee, Louisville, and Detroit, with considerable investments around high school excellence, ensuring that Black men and boys graduate from high school, college, career, and community ready. And I think it's important to have those 3 C's together because I think that people forget about those who do community organizing need to also be included because there's a lot of great work happening from the community organizing perspective. Definitely want to shout out all those community organizers who are joining this work because that's where I started, as well as being a classroom teacher.
Wow, that's a lot. Can you talk a little bit about the Rumble Young Man Rumble? What is that a little bit?
So Rumble Young Man Rumble is a convening of leaders who work on behalf of Black men and boys across the country. One of the things that we have found at CBMA is while it's important to work towards healing and supporting those who, specifically Black men and boys who have experienced trauma, we've also found that it's equally as important to support those who are actually doing the work. Because it is very stressful. We have found that a significant number of individuals have mentioned that they thought about committing suicide, dealing with their own mental health issues. And we have found that building this sense of community through Rumble Young Man Rumble, which happens at the Ali Center in Louisville, has had a significant impact on the field, leaders in the field. We just hosted Rumble Young Man Rumble at the Ali Center. This was our 7th annual Rumble. We're now hosting Rumble Young Man Rumble in regional spaces because we have found that we need to work directly with the community and some of our place-based strategies. And I think that what's critical is, and I'm hip hop head, so I want to quote Talib, and Talib said that the revolution is inside of you. And one of the things that's important is that in order for us to think critically about this work, we have to understand that while the revolution might be inside of us, it is critical for us to take care of ourselves as we lead the revolution. Rumble Young Man Rumble provides us an opportunity to do that, and Rumble has had a significant impact on the lives of so many people.
Oh, that's powerful, very powerful. So in terms of the work that you do, again, in straddling these two different worlds, what led to that transition for you, and what do you think that people can learn from that?
So I think that, academia for woke researchers who do research as one of the best books that I was ever given by my dissertation chair, Research in the Public Interest, it can be a dangerous space to be in, especially if you speak truth internally through your research that's conducted externally, and you kind of turn the lens to look at kind of the cracks and flaws in the system. And so for me, I think that I just needed a change, and I wanted to go back to my K-12 roots, which is why I ended up in the DC public schools. And there are moments where I wrestle with the value added of academia, and how does that intersect with those who are actually doing the work, and how do you build the research practice community? And I think that there needs to be a revolution and an evolution where a community of practice, where folks get together on a regular basis to talk through these types of things. And so for me, I had to make that choice. It was a difficult choice because I had tenure at the university. And, and I had friends who weren't friends anymore. They're like, dude, like, you gave up your tenured job. And I just told them, like, I had to go with the spirit, and the spirit moved me to do something else. And as a colleague and good friend, David Stovall at the University of Illinois, Chicago always says, tenure doesn't mean that they can't fire you. It just means it's harder to fire you. And so I think for me, that always spoke to me when I heard Stovall say that when I was at the very beginning stages of my academic career. And I just felt like it was time for me to do something else in my own professional life and contribution to my community.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that journey has taught you a lot of lessons, and that's actually where I want to turn.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of recommendations, and I'm going to ask you in a few different areas, but first, since we've kind of talked about it a little bit, what recommendations would you have for researchers, for those who want to make their research useful in the realm that you work in, which is kind of a blend of both policy and a blend of foundation work?
So I'm going to go real radical and challenge the system, right? I'm not going to actually challenge researchers, because I think the researchers are operating in a system that is fixed against them doing actual engagement in the community, because you don't get credit for when you go up for tenure. Now, it's not to say you can't do it, but I also think that if someone says, well, you need to publish X number of articles versus doing teaching a class, for instance, like if I'm teaching a class to young folks in the east side of Detroit, and I'm trying to get tenure at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and I'm significantly impacting the lives of young people in the community, how come that can't count for tenure, right? Like, and so for me, I think that the system needs to figure out how to allow community engaged scholarship to be not just seen as another thing, but as normative, right? And like, it's okay for folks to do that. And again, I think that there are folks who have done it. I mentioned David Stovall, I think Jeffrey Duncan Andrade and his work, they have all found that balance, but having talked to them, it's a struggle and a battle internally inside the institution to get people to understand the value of this type of engagement as an academic when you are bound by, tenure rules that require you to publish an article in a journal that 5 people read, as opposed to saying, let me put an op-ed piece. And I'm not saying this to throw shade at the journals. All I'm saying is that if we want our research to make an impact on the community, what's wrong with me doing a blog post and that 200,000 people read and 50,000 teachers actually can use this research? So
that's powerful. You forgot to mention one thing, that those 5 people also happen to be your 5 closest colleagues.
Absolutely, right? And so that the notion of blind peer review is kind of funky whenever I think about it, because it's like, I know who's writing this. And and I think that the other piece of this that is also a challenge is because of the history of universities, researchers, and community, like there are communities that don't want researchers there. right? And so I think it's like this challenge that we face. And I think as long as we live in a world where Black minds matter, it's important for us to stand together in solidarity to understand that the research helps inform practice, but the practice should help inform researchers. In fact, I would be down for somebody to take a sabbatical and say, you know what, I'm not gonna write for an entire semester. I'm gonna go do X, Y, and Z at a nonprofit where I actually do the work, not research, but actual practice. And so if you're studying juvenile justice, let me see you work that out at a juvenile detention center where you got young brothers struggling with their own issues inside of a system that challenges their own humanity. So.
And you're bringing the heat. All right. So good point. So what about, and we've had a few folks who've talked about recommendations for educators, but what recommendations would you have for educators based upon the work that you've done from these multiple different vantage points? What can they do to better support the success of our Black boys and men?
Tupac said, if there be pain, all you need to do is call on me to be with you. And I think one of the critical pieces is that folks in education just need to show up, right? Like literally show up for young folks, stand and greet them at the door, even if they made you mad the day before. Because the role of young people in schools is to piss off the teacher. Like, that's what happens, right? But we still have to love them. And I think that educators need to love young folks because if you don't love them, you can't teach them. And I think that's fundamental to the work. And again, I'm not denying we need professional development on Read 180 and other types of technical things that happen in a classroom, but we need a love revolution in classrooms and in schools, and we need to teach people how to build a hope framework. And shout out to my folks in Milwaukee because they built something called a dignity framework. And this idea of dignity is so important, and I would encourage folks to look at the work that they've done in Milwaukee. Shout out to the superintendent, Dr. Driver, because she's a huge partner with the work that we do at CBMA. The last thing I'll say is that it's important for folks in classrooms to understand what are the key indicators of success, right? So in other words, I've been in schools where I've said to principals, well, what is it that you're looking for your high school young folks to actually accomplish by the end of 10th grade? And they run off a whole list of things. And I say, well, how many of those indicators are gonna help them graduate on time with the ability to function in the world so that they can change and revolutionize our actual democracy? And they'll say, well, I'm not sure. And like, there are literally things that have been tested by researchers and proven to actually work, especially in urban schools, that we often ignore, similar to what Dr. Tolson said. And so I said to them, well, are you tracking the English 1 and Algebra 1 pass rates for young people? Are you putting your best English 1 and Algebra 1 teachers in these classrooms? And they're like, well, not necessarily. And for me, it's like, well, that should be considered educational malpractice. And as David John says, it's not just about teaching the babies, but once you love the babies, we should be willing to use the research to do right by the babies, because these are not somebody else's children. These are our children. And I fundamentally believe that until we figure that out in education, there are going to be some consistent challenges that we will continue to see as we look to educate our young kings and queens throughout America.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn to the Twitter feed because there's questions that are coming in for you already.
Okay.
So the question I wanted to ask is about the recommendations you might have for those who work in policy or in foundation work. What do they be doing to help change this current paradigm that we see? So
I think that folks in philanthropy, and I love folks in philanthropy, I think that they definitely have value added. Like, I don't take the position that everybody in philanthropy doesn't have experience or anything like that. But I also think that when you're trying to solve generational challenges, when you're trying to solve challenges that have existed for hundreds of years across multiple generations, you can't do it in a 3-year funding cycle, right? Like, It just doesn't work that way. Oftentimes in philanthropy, people will lean in and like say, well, okay, we've done this for 3 years. Now we're done with this particular priority, even if the strategic priority is deeply connected to systemic issues of oppression and racism and white supremacy. Like, it took a long time to get here, and it's going to take an even longer time to get out of it. So I think that it's about figuring out how to have some grant-making strategies using a racial equity lens. And I'm happy to say that there are a lot of folks in philanthropy using a racial equity lens. Darren Walker at Ford Foundation has done a lot of writing about the role of philanthropy and racial equity. And I think that is huge. I think for policymakers, you know, I love policymakers, but there are also policymakers who don't know anything about practice, right? And I think that's always my challenge when I think about classroom teachers, and you'll have school districts that say, well, we're going to reduce the number of suspensions and that's the policy. All right, that's cool. But like, what does this mean in practice, right? Like, what tools are you now going to give me as a teacher to help not just eliminate suspensions by not kicking kids out, but help young folks deal with the trauma that they have experienced as a result of a system that has dehumanized them. And until we start to get into the weeds on that and do some of the root cause analysis in that way, I just wonder how far we're going to get. And the last thing I'll say is that I remember reading this text. I want to say Jeffrey Duncan Andrade and Ernest Morel wrote this book, or maybe it was an article, and I quoted it many years ago when I was an academic, and it talked about urban school systems are actually not failing. They are producing the outcome that they were designed to produce. Right. And so I think that, again, some of it is about us having this type of challenge to think about, if we're going to deal with policy, how does that policy help change the actual systems, the inputs and the outputs, especially the inputs into the system, whether we're talking about curriculum, professional development. And again, you know, it's not, a lot of this isn't rocket science, right? And, you know, and again, like I said, I'm a hip hop head, and, you know, Nas told us, like, we were kings and queens, never porch monkeys, right? Like, so Nas is telling us, like, if we get in touch with our roots and our history, like, that can provide us with guidance, because our ancestors actually made it from the hulls of slave ships to the White House in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue at one point, right? And again, I think that it's important for us to not forget the role that our history, but also thinking about as policymakers, how do we implement policies that don't allow ethnic studies programs to become marginalized and seen as if that's the problem with our current education system. I don't want to go down the road of talking about the whole thing around ethnic studies programs getting banned in Arizona, but nonetheless, I'll throw shade at the folks in Arizona who have stood against ethnic studies and stand in solidarity with those who have stood up for that particular body of work in our community.
Absolutely. As a former Black history major, I don't think there's anything more important.
No doubt.
Comes from DeMarcus Merritt. He says, how do I join the movement of Black Campaign for Black Male Achievement? Is there any way, how do people get involved?
So the Campaign for Black Male Achievement is a membership organization, free membership organization. We have a variety of resources available on our website, blackmaleachievement.org. I would encourage folks to sign up. We have network calls that we put out. We have a fellowship program. We just hosted a fellowship program in collaboration with the American Express Foundation. Shout out to my colleague, Lucia Maddox, who helped organize that for the campaign. We brought together leaders over the course of a 3 or 4 day period to help support their work. And then we have monthly meetings with them to continue to provide professional development. We have a community of practice that, again, we're going to kick out in January with the brothers from Be Me. And Be Me, we're going to do some asset framing workshops around the country, probably about 5 to 6 of them over the course of 2018. Folks can hit me up on Twitter, shoot me email at rsimmons@blackmaleachievement.org, and I can answer all those questions and connect you with folks that are doing this work around the country and some of the resources that we have at CBMA.
And what is your Twitter handle?
At Robert_Simmons3.
Okay, at Robert_Simmons3. Okay,
Yep.
This next question comes from Dr. Naylor. Says, can you please share your top tips for science teachers, both in class and online?
So that's hits in one of my favorite spots as I was a science and a math teacher. One of the things is that when I think about science teachers, oftentimes science is taught from a very westernized, Eurocentric perspective. And I think that is a mistake. And I think looking at things around culturally relevant STEM, I think looking at the work of Chris Emdin is key in this space. And there's a great bit of work that should be done around tech equity. But also I think that for science teachers, those in STEM in general, I would say, is that we need to work with our young folks to ensure that they're producers of knowledge, not just consumers of knowledge, but thinking about how do we embed in the curriculum their ability to create apps, their ability to use Twitter to hold discussions as opposed to going on Instagram, Snapchat, and just kind of rambling on. And I also think that there's a point where we need to hold our young folks accountable in our STEM classrooms. Again, going back to their history and understanding that, you know, and I'm a math person and science person, but like literally, are we really going to say Pythagorean theorem yet? They built the Egyptian pyramids thousands of years before this happened. So part of it is using science to debunk, similar to what Dr. Tolson was talking about, but how do we use science to debunk myths and the mythology that has been propagated as normative that suggests that European and a Eurocentric framing for science is the only way of thinking out about the world. And it's not to suggest that Europeans haven't contributed to the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but it is to say that other parts of the world and other communities have also done their part to advance scientific knowledge and inquiry and scientific literacy across the globe.
Okay, this next question, it says, for Dr. Simmons, for applied researchers, institutional research, we will never be protected by tenure at our colleges and universities that we work at. Do you have suggestions for how we can challenge the system from the inside? How do we navigate those complex systems and still share much needed knowledge without getting shut down or shut out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question, right? I think that you can't go alone. You have to go with a coalition, and unfortunately, you have to go with colleagues who can help protect you, right? Like people who have tenure, senior faculty who can help do that. And I just wonder, what does it look like for a group of researchers and a group of practitioner researchers and anyone in the academy to actually go to the university with a set of demands? But I also think that you can effectuate change through your students, right? And how you actually teach them to advocate for a lot of the critical issues. I don't think there's a good answer. I think a lot of folks are trying to figure that out. But as I always used to say to folks, and you know, and granted, like I got in trouble all the time at the university. But I used to tell folks, like, I'm gonna get tenure standing up, not on my knees. Like my mama didn't raise me like that. And so like there are consequences to that, right? And I'm willing to live with those consequences if it means doing the right thing. But I also think it's important to have white colleagues, as my dissertation chair would always say, push their white privilege chips to the center of the table at critical moments when this type of discourse is happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. We cannot do this alone. Last question for you. This comes from Fabiola Torres, and it says, have there been efforts by the campaign to reach out to the Hollywood industry allies to inspire, expand, or contribute to improving the life outcomes of our Black boys and men?
Yeah, we've done some work. We have hosted Black Male Reimagined. And if you go to our website, you'll see some of the entertainers that we've worked with around narrative change specifically. And I think that, you know, that is a key a key piece of our work. MLK Now is one of the big events that we've done in New York City, which intersects with quite a few entertainers. And we've, you know, supported bringing entertainers into this space through public service announcements and things like that. But I definitely would love to learn more about ways that we can be better at that, because I think that that is an area of growth and an opportunity for not just for the campaign for Black male achievement, but the field of folks concerned not just about Black men and boys, but about Black girls and Black children in general, is leveraging the voices of celebrities but also not just celebrities and entertainers, but those celebrities who are behind the scenes, and those celebrities that have impacted our lives in ways that we don't know. And I always tell young folks, like, you want to know one of my icons is the brother who invented the Super Soaker. I mean, the Super Soaker got me into a lot of trouble as a kid. But if I think about telling the story of STEM to young brothers in the community, I'm going to go get him. And yes, I love LeBron James, but this brother has actually done STEM work and is filthy rich and has put a lot of that money back into the community and on the block.
Absolutely. Any parting words for those who are participating?
Keep going. As I said, Talib said, the revolution is inside of you. And like, we have to believe that the revolution will be live, as Gil Scott Heron, and like, it's going to be right there in front of us every day. And, you know, we have to continue pressing. And again, shout out to the work that Luke, you're doing and you're leading. Shout out to everybody who's participated and to everybody engaged in the Black Minds Matter work and movement around this country.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. We truly appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Take care.
Okay. So lastly, we're going to turn to an interview that we conducted with Dr. Gerlando F.L. Jackson, who is a colleague and friend and mentor of mine. And we're going to turn to that, where we had the opportunity to ask him about the work that he does. And as part of that, you're going to hear a little bit about the International Colloquium on Black males. So we'll turn to that for our conclusion.
Welcome, everyone. Glad you're here and joining us this evening. Tonight we have a special guest, Dr. Gerlando F.L. Jackson. Dr. Jackson is the Vilas Distinguished Professor of Higher Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He also serves as the Director and Chief Research Scientist of the Wisconsin's Equity and Inclusion Laboratory, otherwise known as the WE Lab. In addition to this, he is also the co-founder of the International Colloquium on Black Males in Education. We are pleased to have him with us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for joining us. It's really a pleasure and honor to have you with us today. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this very important project. And I look forward to seeing not only this video, but the rest of the others in this series.
Thank you. For those who may not be as familiar as myself with the great work that you're doing, can you give an overview of some of the research you've done that's focused on this population? What are some of the general topics and patterns that you look at in your work?
Sure. The area on Black males that I personally focus on deals with Black male professionals in higher education settings. And so I explored Black males in the academic workforce from a perspective primarily in their academic pursuits as professors, and to some extent in their roles in academic leadership. Mm-hmm. So that's the area I've occupied from my own individual research perspective.
And so what brought you to that research, your experience in really occupying both of those spaces personally?
No, it was a serendipitous pathway. As I was working on my doctoral program, I had no focus on race, ethnicity at all. I was primarily focused on organizational science, administrative science topics, with the emphasis on administrative behavior, studying the behavior of those in administrative roles. And it was the invitation to be a part of the Brothers of the Academy initial book, and then resulting organization that came a year later, one being published in 2000, with the book project beginning around 1999, mm-hmm. and then an organization being formally established in 2001. It was that space that introduced the whole idea of looking at Black males. The Brothers of the Academy Institute initial organization had a fundamental purpose of collaborative scholarship. And when in the initial inception, it was a broad-based disciplinary organization where we had individuals that were in the medical field, engineering, computer science, and education. And so really the only two things or items we had in common was the pursuit of the professoriate and being Black males. And so when we worked on collaborative scholarship, those were the common areas. And so in order to contribute, through several conversations, I ultimately started to write about Black males and their pursuit in the academic enterprise as professionals.
Now let's go back to your research. So you look at Black professionals and administrators in post-secondary settings. Can you talk about some of the challenges that they might face in trying to traverse a system that sometimes isn't as supportive of them as it should be?
You know, it's a wonderful question and a fairly complex problem.
Yeah.
In the sense that at the onset, for the most part, many of us are operating in organizations that were never designed to welcome us, or our ideas and the differences that we bring. And so fundamentally, the challenges are manifold in that particular regard. But when you begin to unpack that from a journey standpoint, if I was able to think in that way, you know, you hear about in the literature and stories as you talk to our colleagues about how difficult it is to even get the type of experiences during graduate school that prepare you in any way for the professoriate, if I narrow it just for this particular purpose. You know, the ability to be paired with a outstanding mentor in the form of a chair, a dissertation chair, an advisor who can show you the pathway, who can make opportunities available for you, and then to ensure that you have appropriate funding where you are able to stay focused is a journey and a feat in and of itself.
Yeah.
And then as you move from there and you think about the job market, the job place, and how we fit from a competitive standpoint, you know, it's almost exclusively linked to the types of experiences we've had from a publication standpoint, from a preparation standpoint, as well as from a relationship building and network standpoint, because it's pretty difficult to have no established network or reputation in the field and do well on the job market. And then that just transitions into the position. If those that are fortunate enough to obtain those faculty positions, those disparities follow you, right? They follow you as you enter into your first year, where this might be the first time you even learn what the full set of responsibilities of a professor is, right? That all that invisible work that you don't see until it's placed on your desk. If you didn't have a good relationship or a good working relationship with your advisor or anyone that has taken, that took to your development, you're basically spending your first year understanding what the job is about, let alone being productive. And so as we enter and start to understand those real challenges in the position, the organizational disparities become pretty evident and prevalent, where there may be a fit or may not be a perceived fit for your work where you end up. and understanding how you help a institution or department understand the importance and value of your work, is a feat in of itself, as well as knowing how to frame your work within a context where it can be valued. It's certainly a difficult task, but unfortunately one we have to take on.
And you use the word fit. It's a word we hear often that is typically used to keep us out of a lot of these positions. When in your work, I mean, what does that really mean to say that when people say that, hey, someone doesn't seem to fit our culture or fit our institution? Is it really about the work that they do, or is it more so about just unconscious bias and exclusionary practices?
So I'll answer that from two perspectives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think in your question you outlined that we do use concepts for various reasons in all job and work spaces, and fit is certainly one that's hard to challenge, right? It's very hard to challenge if a person fits, right? And it's almost always one of the reasons offered when opportunities are not made available.
Yeah.
But specifically to my research, though, if you look at the models around hiring, and if you were modeling individual assets, accrued assets, and you controlled organizational variables, and you just thought simply around, most of these statistical models include individual variables and they include organizational variables. Mm-hmm. And we often think of these organizational variables almost primarily and exclusively as controls. Like, we want to ensure we don't compare the experiences of someone at one type of institution to someone at a different type of institution, and then we want to control for discipline and areas like that. But if you look real closely at a lot of those studies, you'll find that the organizational coefficients sometimes are larger than the individual one.
So it's more about the organization than it is about the person.
Arguing that sometimes and oftentimes where you do what you do matters more than what you do. Now let me make that as simple. Let me make that very simple and plain.
Okay.
I might be the very best person in the world at riding a unicycle. I could set all world records that no one can beat. Mm-hmm. But I work at a place that exclusively values those that can ride on two wheels. There is no recognition or acknowledgement about what I can do on the one wheel because there's no value there. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter that I may be the very best in the world on one wheel. It only matters on what I can do on two wheels. And unless I am equally good on two wheels, it matters not how great I am at one wheel. And so the translation, goes to, you cannot receive reward in your workplace if they don't value what you do, right? I would never be honored as the very best in the world because they don't care anything about how well I can ride a unicycle. And many of us are put in places and predicaments where the overall value and what we are able to contribute is unknown, misunderstood, and perhaps even not valued at all.
Mm-hmm. So I want to go to a concept of yours that really has helped to inform the thinking that I have in terms of how I approach recommending to people what they can do to build organizational diversity. And it's a concept around that you basically took the idea of social closure theory and then applied it to education, looking at basically people form their opinions on candidates based upon those who resonate with them, and that typically those who are most like them are those who are going to resonate with them. I might be not saying it as exactly as eloquent as you said. Can you talk about that a little bit and how that might then influence that perceived fit in a hiring process?
Yes. When I was searching for ways to try to understand what we observe in higher education as relates to disparities, organizational disparities, and those particular negative impacts, that some of the traditional thoughts and ways that we talked about it just weren't as resonant with modern times.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that very few people actually see themselves as actively discriminating against someone, right? Right? That there's very few people that will even understand to believe that there's some discriminatory element to what they do or what they don't do. And the wonderful component or aspect about social closure theory is that it's about it accommodates the unintended consequences, right? That it primarily focuses on you actively seeking out to protect opportunities for those in your group, with no consideration for those that's not in your group. Like, you did not save the space for me at the lunch table because you didn't want someone different from me or you to sit there. You just wanted to make sure that we could sit there together. And at no point did you ever consider someone else actually want to sit next to you, or even the impact of not being able to sit next to you would lead to someone's else, life opportunities. Like, you put no consideration in to what someone else sitting in that seat could do if they had a chance to meet you, know you, learn from you, be a part of your network. You only thought about, hey, I want to sit and eat next to this particular person, which I've been sitting and eating with for 20 years. And so the social closure theory accommodates the mindset that you may not be intending to create any type of disparity in an organization, but it's the indirect result of you protecting rights to do what you would like to do in that workplace with those that you like to do it with. That the intent to do that creates an environment for those not in your group that you just might not be paying attention to. And social closure theory opens up the discussion for that.
Well, based upon what you say, if individuals are simply going to replicate who they'd like to sit at the table with, then it obviously doesn't bode well for people who are different from them, and oftentimes that's people of color. So if I'm hearing this and I'm on a hiring committee, what would you tell me so that I can make sure that I have, one, a diverse pool, but two, make sure that I'm making the right decision, not the decision that's, again, based upon my own personal interest of who I'd like to be sitting at the table with?
It goes back to organizational direction, right? Because when you begin to look at the candidates And if your lens around evaluation, production, and merit is primarily shaped around historical white male norms, then your candidate, regardless of the epidermis, will still, the outcome will still yield someone that goes about their work in a similar way, right? So this takes us back to the initial discussion that there will always be and have always been people of color, women, and those that are different that through a set of individual assets and characteristics went about their work in ways that would be appreciated in an organization that only appreciates work in a particular way. But it's, if we're actually looking to make hires that do more than diversify on the surface level, that the person looks different, but they go about their work in the same way as everybody else, that means we have to have had very tough discussions about, well, is this particular statistical approach the only acceptable approach? Are these 5 concepts the only acceptable ones to test? Are these 10 institutions, are these the only acceptable places where from we should hire? And so on. Like, those are the discussions you have to have, because hiring faculty is very difficult, regardless if everybody was exactly the same. Even if we made every person in the equation share the exact same characteristics, it's still difficult to choose among a set of options to determine, well, who shows us the greatest potential to do well. Add a bunch of variables that you don't understand, such as the person has a profile where they went to a school you've never heard of. Well, what do you do with that? Right? You could be informed and say, while I've never heard of it, my research tells me that this is an outstanding school. Or you could not go and check that school out and make the assumption that many will do. Well, if I never heard of it, it can't be that good. Right? And it's those types of real life decisions that occur through the process of bringing new people into an organization that creates a ton of variables. I mean, create a ton of barriers when you have multiple points of difference in your profile.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, either about the research that you do or your practice that you, before we close this out?
Sure. I think we're at a wonderful time in the academy, as well as potentially being better positioned to assist in our communities, where there is a growing cadre of scholars who are very committed and interesting to solving important and long-standing challenges for Black males in education. And I say that because when I got involved, it was not a priority, almost in any case, for work like this to be done, or that a person who could receive tenure almost exclusively publishing about the experience of Black men. I mean, I think that the lack of discussion about the fact that people can now receive tenure, almost studying exclusively the experience of Black males. This is a different time.
Yeah.
And having this different time and having and us being at a place where institutions and those making decisions on issues such as promotion and tenure can be influenced and can even understand the value of that potentially conceived narrow body of work is valuable enough to say this person has contributed in very important ways to the education literature. We give them tenure. We promote them to full. We do these things that the Academy values, says that we're poised. We're poised to go even to the next level. And this is within a 20-year time frame, right? So, as projects develop and they mature, we have to certainly make sure that the evolution around the placement, utility, and value of the scholarship on Black males in education continues to evolve to the point that there are additional opportunities that scholars are able to pursue well beyond what's on the table now because of the nurturing development and the advancement in this particular space. So I think that's something that, if not discussed, should certainly be minimally recognized, that we are at a different place. No matter how difficult or how challenging we still find ourselves to be in, that there should be a moment, a pause to say, the early work of others to get to this point, and just the formal organizations of entities like Brothers of the Academy Institute, and there's others, and even the ability to have a global research convening, like these are all signs of maturity. And so I think we need to take a good stock and inventory in that regard as we think about our next plans going forward.
And largely, I would say that you have been one of the critical people in helping to change that paradigm by serving as a trailblazer in your field and as a mentor to many of us who are passionate about this work. So thank you for everything that you've done to help change that paradigm. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Truly, truly, truly appreciate it.
So many great words of wisdom from this evening. I just wanted to kind of conclude this whole session, this whole course with just a couple really quick points. And it begins with really a statement that was made by Vanessa McCullers from MOB. She said, "The biggest obstacle facing Black boys is perception." And what you see here is the pyramid of success that myself and Dr. Harris use in the work that we do in training educators to better work with our Black boys and men. And essentially the pyramid begins with this notion that perception is absolutely central. We can't engage in teaching practices, we can't engage in relationships with students if we don't see them differently than we are taught to. So the dehumanized notion, this notion of bias, we have to engage that first before we can ever engage a relationship with them, because otherwise that relationship won't be as fruitful as it could be, because they will see us as being disingenuous and they will be wary of wanting to engage us. Second aspect of this pyramid of success is relationships that are typified by trust, mutual respect, and authentic care. Whenever we are engaging with our Black boys and men, those are the messages that we want to be communicating with them and to them. Otherwise, they won't be receptive to it. And then lastly, it gets down to strategies and practices that are effective in engaging, culturally relevant teaching, mentorship, collaborative learning, using appropriate disclosing practices, validating practices, all the different things that we've talked about in this course. And so sometimes when you hear educators, they're like, oh, well, just tell me what to do. But that's beginning up here. And ultimately, we can't just tell you what to do, because it begins with changing hearts so that we can eventually change relationships, so we can eventually change practices that can lead to student success. So in this course, what we sought to do was to help raise the national consciousness about issues facing Black boys and men in education. And hopefully we've done at least a little bit of that in trying to help change the paradigm that we see by drawing linkages between how Black boys and men are treated in society in terms of how they are dehumanized, how they are devalued, and how they are criminalized, and talking about how those same patterns occur in educational settings. We really want to thank you for being part of this process. A few special thank yous first to Dr. Ebony Zamani Gallagher, who is a very close friend and colleague, and who really helped as we really tried to think about how do we unfold this course. To my colleague and close friend, Dr. Frank Harris III, many of the concepts from our work was able to present in this course, and for his support. To Karan Jain, who has been helping us with the also to for the sites that have been participating in this course. We sought tonight to try to provide you with some opportunities to engage further beyond this course. So we had an opportunity to hear from Moms of Black Boys United. That's an opportunity to get involved. We have talked about the campaign for Black male achievement with Robert. That's an opportunity to get involved. Dr. Jackson has a colloquium, an international colloquium on Black males. That's an opportunity to get involved. And believe me, there's more to get involved with in terms of Black Minds Matter that you'll be hearing from us as we move farther down the road. I'd just like to leave you with one small thing, and that's this. Thank you for being advocates for our boys and men of color.